This is part 2 of our workshop, Choosing Curriculum the Family Way. There are 6 factors that make each family unique. Your faith or philosophy distinctives, what approach to education you take, the money you have to spend, the individuals who make up your family life, and you, the homeschooling parent. Of course, it's no coincidence that these form the acronym FAMILY. In this part of Choosing Curriculum workshop, we are going to look at the faith and approaches factors. In the next segment, we'll look at the last 4 factors: money, individuals, life, and you. When I was asked why we were homeschooling, I always replied with a variation of these reasons. We want our children to have an education that is thoroughly integrated with a biblical and Christian worldview. We want to promote family unity and to avoid negative peer pressure or dependency. We want to provide our children with an excellent but also a tailored education. As you've made your decision to homeschool, you've undoubtedly been doing some thinking about why. So you have a good idea of what your own specific reasons are, and they might differ from our reasons. In fact, they probably will differ. Some of you want your children to be thrilled with learning. Some of you want your children to be safe. Some of you want your child to do better than he is now because right now he's failing. Some of you want to allow for the development of special interests and abilities. Some of you want your child to avoid medication or a label. Some of you want to protect your child from bullies. What are your reasons for homeschooling? Have you thought about what success will look like? Suppose you only homeschool for 1 year. How will you know you did a good job? If your student is able to go back into the public school system, then you'll know you've done a good job. What if you homeschool for 10 years? How will you know if you've succeeded? If your children have scored high each year on a standardized test, then you'll know you've succeeded. What if you homeschool, like I did, clear through high school? Will graduation itself be the measure of success? Or does there need to be something more? So the question is, after you've completed however many years of homeschooling you complete, how will you know if you've been successful? Are you seeking to develop godly character in your children? Do you want your children to be faithfully walking with the Lord? Are you seeking to develop a strong student? Maybe you want your child to qualify for a large scholarship or to get into the college of his choice. Do you want your daughter to be ready to take care of her own home, her husband, her children, and your son to be prepared to be an effective leader in his home? Or maybe you want your son or daughter to start and operate their own business or to be part of a family business. Or maybe you want all of the above. You probably have some idea of how you'll know if you've been successful. If not, start thinking about it. How will you know if you've done a good job? Closely related to that is the educational goals that you have for your children. If there were no laws or state standards, what would you want your children's education to include? Real-life experiences and exploration, learning to work independently, reading good books, real books. How about developing practical life skills and work skills? Or how to start and operate a family business? Maybe you just want to make sure you cover all the same subjects as the public schools are covering. Or perhaps your goal is stimulating your child's curiosity and interest and a love for learning, or is mental training and discipline. What do you want your children to learn? These things, the reasons you are homeschooling, what success will look like for you, and your educational goals all contribute to your family's faith or philosophy factor. Our A in family is the various approaches to education in general and homeschooling in particular. It's easy to see why this is pivotal. You've probably already heard some of the terms that are associated with the various educational approaches. Hands-on, drill to instill, fact memorization, real books, facts first and then a framework, explore and investigate. And you've likewise probably already run across some of the names associated with the various approaches. Charlotte Mason, classical, traditional, unit studies, Thomas Jefferson Education. All of the general Getting Started homeschooling books address the question of how children learn, and they seek to give you a working answer. Kathy Duffy talks about teaching approaches. Deborah Bell and Mary Pride talk about methods. Each has her own list of the various options. You'll want to do some thinking about how your children assimilate information, what motivates them to learn, and what kind of input and output methodologies you're comfortable with. Let's take a quick look at some of the basic approaches to home education. When using traditional textbooks, information flows from the teacher to the student. This is typically in the form of textual information that is read by the student, followed by questions, reinforcing activities, and tests. Textbooks usually mean less planning for the teacher. Papers are easy to grade, and record keeping is straightforward. And there are tests to show how the student is progressing. However, textbooks also usually mean less freedom for the student and less depth in terms of information. This means there's a higher potential for boredom. Emphasis is on short-term mastery and test taking, in other words, teaching to the test, and materials are usually grade-specific. Bob Jones and Saxon are examples of traditional textbook publishers. The classical approach is organized around the TRIVIUM learning model, which describes 3 different stages of learning. There's the grammar stage, when young students are little fact sponges, or the dialectic stage, when middle school students start to think logically, and the rhetoric stage, when the emphasis is on synthesizing information and on writing and speaking. Classical curriculum is typically academically rigorous, and it incorporates classical literature. There is an emphasis on teaching thinking skills and in developing independent learners, which is considered an advantage. Materials tend to be grade-specific, although some newer publishers, like Peace Hill, have multi-grade curriculum. Higher teacher-student interaction and teacher involvement are also typical characteristics. In addition to Peace Hill Press, some examples of classical publishers are Memoria Press, Canon Press, Logos School, Classical Writing, and Classical Academic Press. The Charlotte Mason approach is sometimes referred to as a living books approach because it encourages reading real or living books rather than text, and then integrating other subjects into the reading. Narration and notebooking's newest cousin, lapbooking, are specific methodologies that are employed for feedback on the student's progress. This approach allows explorations of subjects in a low-key learning environment, like simply reading a book. But it's difficult to track the work or to follow a traditional scope and sequence, or to align to standards. Some examples of Charlotte Mason publishers and products are Queen Homeschool, Beautiful Feet, Learning Language Arts Through Literature, 5 in a Row, and the Apologia Elementary Science. Unit studies organize subjects around a theme. Educational material usually comes from books, and it usually involves hands-on activities. Rainbow carries both prepared unit studies that do most of the planning for you, but we also have lots of materials that can be used to build and prepare your own unit study. With unit studies, information retention is good. They can usually be used with multiple ages, so they work well with large families, and they can become very in-depth to accommodate a child's particular interests. However, teacher involvement is almost always very high, both in preparation and in interaction. Unit studies are hard to track, and they don't follow a traditional scope and sequence or align to standards. In high school, if you're using unit studies, it can be very difficult to assign high school credits. Some examples of prepared unit studies would be Prairie Primer, Learning Adventures, 5 in a Row, and Moving Beyond the Page. Unschooling assumes that children have an innate desire to learn, and that they should be allowed to follow that desire and follow their own natural curiosity with minimal structure. Obviously, this takes little planning. It does create self-learners, and it tends to avoid teacher burnout. But it's hard to assess. It often neglects some subjects or whole areas of learning, and alignment to state standards is practically impossible. Umbrella programs are often the choice of beginning homeschoolers. The student is enrolled in a school, and the curriculum is either provided or planned for the student. Grading and record keeping is sometimes provided, or sometimes it's optional for additional fees. Using an umbrella school means that there are fewer decisions, which makes it easier on the teacher. But these programs are often quite costly, and they provide less flexibility. Eclectic draws from all the other approaches for various subjects. In other words, mix and match. A student might use traditional textbooks for math, or Charlotte Mason and unit studies for history and science. This allows the teacher to determine what will work best with each subject and for each student. But it can sometimes lead to decision-making confusion. We've looked at the role of faith and homeschooling approaches in determining a family's philosophy of education. In the next segment, we'll look at money, individuals, life, and you.